Wolk, Tamera Tomakili, executive producer Melissa Jr., and our creator, showrunner, and EP Jennifer Patricio. We pass it over. We're sharing some mics here. So Melissa, I want to start with you because I think that makes the most sense since this is your story. How much of the podcast were you, I guess, informed this creative process and how that kind of came and Jen came to you?
The podcast was the first time I ever told the story of meeting my father's victims' family members, and also trying to come to terms with my own identity, because you hear the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and so I felt a lot of guilt for seeing some of the clues, like you saw in this pilot here, that they didn't make sense, they were just breadcrumbs, but as I became an adult, I started to see that they were nuggets of the truth. So I feel like the flashbacks are representative of the true story.
And then Jen, kind of throwing it down to you, how did that kind of come about for you and this story come to you and how you and Melissa started working together?
I listened to the podcast like any other fan of true crime podcasts, and I was just really moved by Melissa's story and just thought it would make such a great show because, you know, we've all seen a lot of shows about serial killers and true crime, but I'd never seen one through the lens of a daughter dealing with, you know, this trauma from her dad, and it's just like a very unique father-daughter story, and also, you know, a serial killer story with pretty much no violence. We don't show any of, we don't show any violence in the show. It's much more about her emotional story and this kind of like psychological cat and mouse between them. I thought it would be, it had the potential to be a new twist on something we'd seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Annaleigh, I want to kind of ask you, how familiar were you with this? Were you familiar with the podcast before?
My mom is an aficionado of true crime, like many of our mothers. And I actually was slightly familiar, but I called my mom before I listened to the podcast, and she kind of gave me the lowdown, because this is obviously one of the more prolific crime stories, because Melissa's story is so interesting, and because of what she did with the bad and made it good. She used this horrific trauma in her life and moved forward in a place of advocacy and used it as an act of service to help others, which is really unique.
Dennis, how about you? What was your first introduction to this, and were you hesitant to step into the role of the happy face killer?
Now it's unplugged.
Is it me?
Okay,
Oh
we
my
can
gosh.
do this.
Where's
Peaches?
We're gonna go over to
Okay.
Annaleigh here.
Now it's coming plugged.
Oh
It's come undone.
no. We're falling apart here, guys.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Well, I didn't really remember the happy face killer, but true crime, of course, is always very interesting, just from the psychology of why they do what they do. It's kind of made for actors, but I really had to think about this one for a long time, simply because I didn't want him to feel any kind of glory about himself being out there, which is exactly what he wants, and it's entertaining for him, I think. But to play somebody like this, it has an effect on you. It has to, because you have to go to these places to figure out these people. And it turns out that serial killers aren't really all that difficult to play, because they really don't have many emotions to speak of. That they don't feel people's people's pain and their emotion. But it was, in the end, I really had to think, should I do this or not? That was a question. But it was because it was the daughter's story, really, and told through her that, and she was out there telling her story because when there's a murder, there's the victim, and then there's the victim's family and friends and loved ones. So there's a lot of people there, and then also there's the murderer and his family and people in his life. So it reverberates, and these are things that we find hard to speak of, but they probably should be spoken of, as it says in the show. Otherwise, you hide that secret, and it just runs under the ground. And so I said yes. But I want my own trailer. So, but it was really fun to shoot too. Actually, it really was.
I love that. And I'm gonna steal this mic
This
back
goes
from
to you.
Yeah.
Careful with that. Okay. Like, very careful.
James, I want to ask you, I feel like you had a very specific role of playing the supportive husband, but also protective father, and kind of finding that balance. So how did you kind of find that? You might want to get the mic from Melissa, it might be tougher.
Yeah, be gentle
Just
with
make sure
you. Yeah, I think, for Ben, who plays Melissa's husband, my way in was like, okay, well, I love this woman, and this is her life, this is her secret, this is her burden. So how do you both support that person, but also try to protect them? And I think, we all have people in our life who we love, and we know that they have their hang-ups and their issues, and this is just the most extreme version of that, right? Like, we all want to protect the people we love from the things that we don't think are healthy for them. That's a very human condition. And then this is just that exploded. And so that was the way I felt about it, is that's Ben's role. And I think as the show goes on, that's what's hard for him, is to see Melissa go through these things. And honored to be here, honored to be a part of it. And Melissa, thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And if you want to pass the mic right next to you, Tamera, I want to ask you also what kind of captivated you about Ivy, and what her process is through this entire thing, and her role.
I think what I loved about Ivy was this fearlessness going into true crime. I think when people think a lot about true crime, there's a sense of fear because we want to know about, I said this earlier, but like the fear of the unknown, the fear of the extreme, the fear of like what is scary. And there's a sense of distance that we all have because a lot of us either, listen to it on a podcast or we hear it on TV or anything. But with Ivy, there's this fearlessness to go in and do the research and confront a lot of these murderers and confront the evil head on. And I think what I loved about Ivy and Melissa was, even though Ivy is very much trying to get a story and push her career forward, I think she is able to bring this bluntness to Melissa and say, look, you can run or you can face it. And yes, it is manipulative, but at the end of the day, you can run away from your fears or you can face them. And I think there's a beauty and a confidence and a closeness that they develop as the show goes on. So please watch. And it's beautiful. I think Ivy is very much a support system for Melissa, kind of dealing with this. Yeah.
Absolutely.